I wanna pick your brain on the so-called repercussions about which Lando spoke, because going into the race weekend, a lot was made of them evening out what Lando did in the prior race, right? The cheeky love tap, and Lando said in the pre-race scrum that there were going to be repercussions for him between now and the end of the season. Now, some speculate that that could be that Oscar, between now and race 24, will have priority as far as when he comes out in qualifying. Do you think, Peter, that's commensurate? Do you think that's McLaren being even-handed for once, or do you think that's them still meddling unnecessarily in the competitive landscape of the Drivers' Championship?
I don't think that's what Lando meant. I think what Lando meant was on track, he's going to have a lot of problems with Oscar Piastri now. I think that's what he meant. If they're battling with one another and it's pretty clear that one of them's on older tyres and it's Oscar in front, normally Oscar might be told to let Lando pass. Now, Lando cannot count on Oscar doing that. I think that's what he's talking about. And he's right to say that. He is absolutely right to say that. And don't forget, we've also got Max Verstappen saying he ain't going to forget what Lando did to him in qualifying in Singapore either. And Oscar's ahead on points. So, Lando knows it's going to get fragile towards the end of the year. And yeah, at least he's admitting to it. I thought it was is churlish the right word? Probably cheeky is a better word. When he said, I think he was asked after was it before the Grand Prix? I don't know when it was, but somebody said, what do you think about the first corner after what happened in the sprint? And he said, what you mean, hopefully nobody hits me? Well, no, he said, I've got to make sure nobody hits me. That's right. There's a sort of slight to Oscar there, wasn't it? But of course, and he said that with his usual, cheeky grin. But of course, the reality is he has never, I guess, been a student of the sport and understood that the way Alan Prost began to win his world championships was to learn from Niki Lauda in 1984 about how not to get run into at the first corner. And as a result of that season Prost then had, he became a second Lauda clone of never being run into at the first corner. And would Lando know that? Has he watched all those races, the first corners of all those races, to see how Niki did it and then how Prost did it? Because that's what he needs to do. And I don't think he's doing that. I think he's just going and thinking, I'm Lando Norris, Oscar better not hit me, sort of thing, without reading body language, understanding where people might go and thinking through the first corners. He needs to do that, just as he needs to think about his side of the garage and get rid of all the social media. But of course, he's never going to do that. But he certainly, between now and the end of the year, if he wants to win the World Championship, he needs to become the best driver on the grid at never being hit at the first corner. Because he's a target now, I can tell you that.
Let's talk about Lando, Peter. Because again, the community is quite divided on Mr. Norris. Some love him. Some think he's a brilliant driver. That when he's had his Weetabix, that there's not too many, not named Max, that can live with Lando. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But there's a problem as far as purists are concerned, like you've alluded to, that Lando almost writes checks with his mouth that his ASS cannot cash. You'll recall that he said to Lewis, it's easy to win races and championships, therefore, when you have the quickest car. And people are like, well, what happened to that, Lando? Lando said last year about next year, this year, that next year will be my year. Zach Brown said you've had the Senna era, you've had the Schumacher era, there was the Hamilton era, and this is the Lando Norris era. I heard a friend say that about Lando, that Lando thinks that he's better than he is. Is the problem that the hurdle over which Lando needs to overcome, is it all in here, Peter? If he sorts out his mental and kind of focuses like you've encouraged him to do you think the championship's his to lose?
Well, he needs to think about those first corners. That's the first thing. But getting to your point, I don't think it's in his head. I think it's all in his hands and his feet and his feel. And he's a long corner driver. That's the problem. He's a very, very good long corner driver. Not as good as Tom Price or Ronnie Peterson or Jochen Rindt or probably even as Carlos Sainz, to be honest. But he is a long corner driver. And we saw that graphically yesterday in his battle with Charles Leclerc. And if you want to know why Lando has ups and downs and why he has issues, just look at the replays of Leclerc versus Lando. We're coming into the second last corner, the corner where you're most likely to get a track limits problem. Charles was getting 8 times out of 10 was getting a perfect rotation, giving him a lovely straight exit so that he could actually position himself correctly as he was going over the curbs with the minimum amount of lateral load on the car, obviously with some, but he was never in danger really of going over the track limits. Whereas Lando, because of his long corner, has to come out with the power on sooner. He has more load on the car. And because he's not Superman, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to overload it. The tires are going to go off. The soft tires are going to go off more than the mediums. There are going to be a lot of other variables. The wind's going to come into play and he's going to make mistakes. You know, he was 3 strikes on that. That is not good enough for a driver who wants to win a world championship. That is the problem. And you'll have so many people saying, oh, well, his attitude here and this and that. And when he's on his day, he's brilliant, blah, blah, blah. I don't buy that. When he's on his day, he's as good as Peter Revson. And that's saying something because Peter Revson was very, very good. I wouldn't have said he was ever as good as Francois Seber, for example. He's good, but he's a long corner driver who makes mistakes and thinks the wrong way quite often. And he's distracted. So there's a lot of things there that are not right for Lando. If he's got a very, very good car, yeah, of course, he's got a lovely touch. He's got a lovely smooth touch and he gets into a rhythm really well. But so do, 150 other drivers in the history of the sport. There's nothing that special about being that good. I'm talking about, if you want to take the race to Max Verstappen, you've got to change your game. And just look at how well Charles drove in a bad car yesterday. I mean, that Ferrari is nothing like as good as a McLaren. And look at the job Charles Leclerc did yesterday. Just superb. Only because he's a short corner driver and knows how to rotate the car and knows exactly what he's doing at any given moment and gives himself a nice big sweet spot with which to manipulate all the variables coming into play. Whereas Lando's on the absolute edge based on performance level he's got. I mean, what was he doing going so quickly after his pit stop on soft tires? Why was he pushing so hard? It was very clear. Well, clear for all those that did the sprint race. Obviously, I'm exaggerating because they didn't run the softs, but it was pretty clear by then that the soft was a fragile tire. If you wanted to do the medium soft thing, you're always going to have to be tiptoeing the last few laps of the race. And yet there he was, absolutely thrashing the tires and not, having to back away for 5-6 laps to cool them down. And then it was all too late. And the same in the first stint, graining on the left front. What was that all about? Why was he slowing down for 3 or 4 laps because of that? We all know graining is not a major issue. We all know that it's a rear limited circuit, Austin. And how many laps did he spend pussyfooting around that? You think Max was doing that? No way. Okay, admittedly, yeah, Max had the sprint race data, which Lando didn't, but, he's been around long enough to know what graining's all about. And there's just all these little details. It's just all these details, plus he's a long corner driver. I mean, I couldn't believe what he was doing at the hairpin when he was chasing Charles. He was going in he's going in wide, and like Max, and Charles, he wasn't going down to any sort of apex. But then instead of straightening the car and getting a lovely straight exit, he was getting the power on really early and running wide with power on to the exit curb. What's that all about? Because he can't help himself. That's the way he's always driven. And I suppose the last point to make is that he spends all these laps behind Charles, which is a bit like, the professor in front of the student in the classroom. Was he paying attention actually to what the professor was saying and doing with his car? Or was he just thinking, oh, well, he's in a Ferrari, he's driving it differently? Probably the latter, I suspect, which is a great shame because he's got the physical, natural feel and talent to do a lot of things. As I say, this is Peter Revson adapted his driving, and Francois Seber, but I don't think it's going to happen, particularly now in the vortex of a championship. He's going to go to all the things that he's always done that have worked for him in the past. And who knows, he may luck into it and win the championship. Oscar may have 5 engine blow-ups and Max may have 1,000,000 problems and Lando will breeze through and win the championship. Anything could happen, obviously, but he's not making it easy for himself, that's for sure.
No, he's not a line of least resistance type of
guy.
No,
and I don't think he's, to say he's not in the same class as Max Verstappen as a driver or Charles Leclerc, and we saw that yesterday.
Fair cop. I can hear Lando Norris fans. If I push back on you ever so slightly, though, Peter, I can hear my Lando Norris fan mates telling me, "What are you talking about, Cameron? Lando's doing his thing his way. He doesn't want to be anything other than himself. That he did well yesterday. That it ultimately his objective is to close the gap to Oscar Piastri and the drivers, and he did that. Now stands at 14 points. That Lando's just." My friends would say to me, Cameron, just allow Lando to sprout his wings and do it all his own way. That it's not only one personality type that's ever won a drivers' championship, and that I need to extend him a bit more grace. To that, Peter, you respond how, sir?
Well, I wasn't talking about his personality then. I was talking about his actual physical talent and the way he drives the car. That's what I'm talking about. Doesn't matter what personality you've got. Doesn't change the difference between a short corner driver and a long corner driver. His personality's okay. I mean, he's talking about Lando fans. I'm a Lando fan, have been for many years, but I'm frustrated that he's not getting any better. And it's not good enough if you're trying to win a world championship to say, oh, he did a good job yesterday, he finished second ahead of Oscar. He got blown away by Max Verstappen in a Red Bull that was arguably as good as a McLaren, probably not as good as a McLaren. And you've got to try and win every race. And to finish second was poor, I thought, because he could have won that race. Yeah. He didn't qualify well for the sprint. He should have been on the pole. He should have been on the pole for both races. The car was that good, and he wasn't. And had he qualified on the pole for the sprint, he probably wouldn't have had that shunt with Oscar, and he would have won the sprint or finished second. And then he would have had more data, and he might have taken the race to Max, because that Red Bull was pretty fragile at the end. The tyres were going off quite badly, more than they would have on the McLaren if the McLaren hadn't been driven the way Lando drove it against Charles. And so I would look back at that weekend and say that was an opportunity lost, as distinct from a great weekend where he got points gained from Oscar. I mean, that's just puerile, isn't it?